Ethan, is a civil trial the same as a criminal trial?
If you were in the courtroom to watch a civil trial and a criminal trial, they look like the same thing. The trial procedure in the court appears to be the same, but there are some significant differences between a civil trial and a criminal trial. The two biggest differences, of course, are who the litigants are, and then, of course, what is the burden of proof in each of the different types of cases.
Can you please explain burden of proof?
In a criminal trial, the litigant always involves the state. The state is always the plaintiff. So it'll be the state of Ohio versus criminal defendant. The burden of proof in a criminal case is always that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. In a civil case, there's no guilty or not guilty. It's a private person or business suing another private person or business for some type of civil relief, usually a money judgment. Sometimes it's an injunction. In those cases, almost always the burden of proof is a burden of proof of more likely than not, what's called a preponderance of evidence. Sometimes the burden is a little higher. There are some causes of action that require clear and convincing evidence. So if you were to imagine the scales, a preponderance of evidence is simply pushing the scales slightly down. Who's more likely right than wrong? Much different than a criminal case.
How long does it take to get a lawsuit to trial?
It takes quite a while, unfortunately, in any court system. My experience, I'm licensed both in Ohio and West Virginia and in the federal courts. In the common pleas court here in Ohio, and essentially the same in the circuit court in West Virginia, from the time you file your civil complaint, that's what gets a lawsuit started, it typically takes at least a year to get to the trial, and many times it takes longer. There's continuances, the court will bump the trial for another trial. Sometimes it can take as much as 2 years. I have some cases that it's 3 years and going since I filed the complaint through no fault of our own. It's just the way the court systems work, that we still have not tried the case. It's a slow process.
How long does the trial last?
Once you get into the trial, it really depends on the case. The simplest of civil cases, let's say a simple car accident with 1 or 2 witnesses, maybe 1 doctor to testify, typically takes 1 day at a minimum, often a day and a half or 2. But there are some more complicated cases that can take 2, 3, 4 days. I've tried 6-day trials, a medical malpractice trial. There are some very complicated cases, often the kind that end up in federal court, that can go on 5, 6 weeks I've seen. So it varies depending on the type of case.
Are most lawyers experienced with civil trials?
No. One of the misconceptions that the public has about lawyers is that they assume at law school that every law student takes a course on how to try cases in front of a jury, and that all lawyers graduate able to stand in front of a jury, take evidence from witnesses, and make closing arguments. That's just not the case. Is it a class in law school? Yes, there's a civil trial, or there's a trial practice class in law school. It's not mandatory. Many do not actually take it. Those who do take it just get the bare minimum at it. Those who graduate from law school typically are just, at least the ones that take the trial practice class, are barely able to be what I consider competent at trying a basic case. Many don't even have that experience. And then once we get into practice, most lawyers are not spending their time in the courtroom. Now, let's take aside prosecutors' offices and public defenders' office. That's a whole different thing. They're in the courtroom a lot. But in the world of civil law, many lawyers are transactional lawyers, writing instruments, advising clients, and then there are many litigators. Being a litigator and then having experience actually in the courtroom trying cases are 2 different things. You, as the general public, would be quite surprised the number of litigators who have no real experience in front of a jury in a civil case. It's just not that common. People would be surprised the number of lawyers, litigators, who have never tried more than 3 or 4 trials in their career.
Is it important to choose a lawyer that has experience with civil trials?
Yes, it's very important. I find it somewhat amazing that people will hire lawyers with very important cases, civil cases, that could end up in front of a jury without checking to see if their lawyer has experience doing that. If we are to hire a surgeon, we have something wrong in our body and we need to have surgery. We are going to want to make sure that surgeon has done that particular type of surgery before, and preferably many times before. And yet, people will entrust a big case to a lawyer and never ask, have you ever done this before? Have you ever tried this kind of case in front of a jury before? Have you ever tried any case in front of a jury before? You'd be surprised the answers. It's very important to ask.
Does Ohio certify civil trial lawyers?
Yes. The Ohio Supreme Court has different levels of specialty certification. There are lawyers who specialize in wills and trusts. There are employment lawyers. There are elder care lawyers. Those lawyers who narrow their practice into a very specific area. One of the areas that is certified by the Ohio Supreme Court and by the National Board of Trial Advocacy is civil trial advocate. Those lawyers who have deep experience trying jury trials, bench trials. They have to have special education, continuing education, recommendations from other judges. When you can find a lawyer that has that certification, and there's only 87 of us in the whole state of Ohio, you will know that you have a lawyer that knows what he or she is doing in a courtroom. If you have a civil dispute and you think you need a trial lawyer, give us a call, 740-374-5346, or visit our website, www.fieldsdemlo.com.